This course is all about security operations. Operations essentially is just the work that we do. We show up to an organization ready to carry out some sort of tasks, to perform some sort of function for that business or organization that we work for. So this course is really about implementing security within those operations. And it can be seen as both as taking security and incorporating it into the procedures we already have, and maybe rolling out some new procedures that make us more secure. So in this lesson, let's take a look at what we're going to be covering throughout this course. As you can see, there is a lot to cover. Incorporating security into all of our operations is a fairly large task. There's a lot of things to think about. So what this course is going to do is take a comprehensive look into what all of these operations look like. We're going to start out just talking about a security program and what a security program is. We're going to get into what makes up a security program, the need for a security program, and also what goes into developing a security program and how we create these controls to mitigate risk. And the idea of a security program is really to develop secure operations. So then we're going to get into security operations and what security operations look like. And we're going to look at each one of these areas, each one of these tasks, everything that we're going to do. We're going to take a look from a function perspective. That is, we're going to have some sort of input, we're going to process things, we're going to have some sort of output. By having this view, we can document things more thoroughly and really have an understanding of what our operations look like. And there's a ton of benefit from doing this. You're going to become much more efficient with your time and how you carry out your day-to-day functions. So we're going to take a look at the big picture as well as all of these other little processes and procedures that we need to incorporate into our day-to-day tasks. Now, one of the biggest reasons why we roll out a cybersecurity program and incorporate security into all of our operations is because of compliance. Compliance has become a huge topic, and there's been a lot of focus on compliance out there to laws and regulations and other different standards that are out there. And those businesses who can't adapt to that are going to become irrelevant. So we're going to talk a lot about life cycles through this whole course. And we're going to talk about life cycles and how it applies to compliance and how we need to continually be updating and checking to make sure that we are meeting the standards that are set out there by all these different laws and regulations. Then we're going to move into risk management. In reality, this whole course is about risk management. All of the operations that we have is about mitigating risk and how we can implement things to mitigate this risk. But what we want to do is we want to cover risk assessments and risk management specifically. There are specific routines that you need to put in place for risk management, to include how do we measure risk. And there are some different options that we have for managing risks. And so we'll get into risk management and how we approach risk management. And do things like risk assessments on a yearly basis to make sure that nothing is falling through the cracks. And really, risk is about protecting assets. So then we're going to get into asset acquisition and management, how we purchase those assets and how we manage those assets. And we'll take assets from a broad term, anything that has some sort of value. We'll talk about how to track those assets and how assets have a life cycle. And we need to make sure we're managing these assets through that life cycle. But assets have certain vulnerabilities. So we're going to look at those vulnerabilities and how to manage vulnerabilities. And believe it or not, vulnerabilities have a life cycle as well. They get implemented, not intentionally, they then get discovered and then published, and then there's some sort of patch or some sort of way to fix that vulnerability. And so we'll talk about that life cycle and how to manage the life cycle of vulnerabilities. And a big part of vulnerabilities is the patching that happens to fix the vulnerability. So we'll also be covering patch management. One of the assets that we need to manage is going to be data. And there's specific things that we need to look into when it comes to managing data as an asset. So we're going to talk about data management. And once again, data has a life cycle as well. It gets created, we have to manage it, at some point we have to retire it. And so we're going to talk about all those different processes and how we incorporate security into the processes of managing data. Now, we do create some of those assets, but for many of our assets, we're actually purchasing them. and we're purchasing them from a vendor. So we're gonna get into vendors and how we manage those. In fact, we're just gonna take this from a relationship standpoint. So we've got customers, we've got vendors, and we've got partners. How do we manage all of those relationships? So we're gonna get into vendor and supply chain management. Now there are different vendor types. We have software, we have hardware, and we have different services. So we'll talk about those vendor types and how to manage each one. We'll also get into supply chain and supply chain management. Because when we purchase a product, we're purchasing it from a vendor. And that vendor is not necessarily the creator of that product. So we have the creator of the product. And that product is actually a grouping of products all rolled into that one product. And so we'll talk about what that supply chain looks like and how to manage it. And how these vendors and partnerships have this life cycle as well. And how we manage through this whole process, through this whole life cycle, we manage these vendors and partnerships and these relationships. I've also heard some companies express that their people, their employees, are assets to the company. And I'd say that people can be either an asset or a liability. So we're gonna get into people management, or we're gonna get into personnel management and what that looks like. Now, personnel management might not seem like an IT related function, but there are certain functions that IT plays in a role, and the security program plays a role into managing personnel. So we'll talk about our part and how we create a secure workforce and how we play into what seems like some HR related tasks. Now, once we hire somebody, that personnel, when we're managing that personnel, one thing that we have to manage is their account. And so we're gonna get into identity and account management. Many of our employees are logging into our electronic systems. And because they log into these electronic systems, we need to make sure that we're securing their account and they only have access to certain things that they need to have access to. So we've got to once again think about the life cycle of the account itself. There's a provisioning process, a maintenance process, a change management process, and a deprovisioning of their account. And a big part with the people that we work with is that we're gonna want to make sure that they're operating securely. So we're gonna get into security awareness and training management. This is a critical part to make sure that our workforce, the employees that we have, are working in a secure manner. That a lot of them are just not gonna know any better, and we need to educate them. And there's a lot of different ways we could go about doing that. So we'll talk about that. But employees do make mistakes. In fact, one of our biggest security concerns is when employees make the wrong configuration changes on systems. So we're gonna get into configuration and change management so we can avoid issues. There are some processes and procedures that we can roll out to really help make this change management process efficient, as well as increase the quality and reduce the amount of risk these changes have to our system. In the end, a proper configuration and change management program can really help us be very efficient and have a lot of other benefits. But even when we roll things out very carefully, we're probably going to run into some issues. And we're going to want to monitor and alert off of issues that we have on our system. So we're going to get into what different things that we should be monitoring on our system and how we should be monitoring it. And when we do get alerted, then we're going to go into incident management, managing the incident. So we're going to talk about things that we can do before there's ever an incident, things that we would do during an incident, and the follow-up, things that we would do after an incident to really help minimize downtime and minimize the effects of any one incident. Now, during an incident, we may have to get into digital forensics. This is when we're going to have to tear into our network, tear into devices, look into things to see what exactly happened, do a forensic analysis to figure out what is going on. This term forensics just means that we can capture evidence and preserve the evidence so we can analyze it and determine what happened. The same thing is true when it comes to digital forensics. We're capturing digital data that we're going to preserve so we can analyze it later. Now, if things really go awry during an incident, we may need to dig into backup or fail over to a disaster recovery site. And there are other incidents or other contingencies that we need to plan for. So we're gonna get into contingency planning. And we're gonna get into what is the differences between an incident response plan, a disaster recovery plan, a contingency plan, and a business continuity plan. And once we've rolled out all these processes and procedures, we're also going to take a look at the overall picture. We'll get into an assessment and what assessments are and auditing is of all of these different systems. Because we may want to roll out things like internal audits or external audits. We may hire a third party to come in and do an audit of our system. And also, we need to get that big picture of what everything looks like and how do we manage the big picture. And that's where we're going to get into program management and what program management looks like, managing the big picture. Because each one of these functions has interplay with other functions, and we need to look at the big picture of how these all correlate. And that's one of the things that a security program, the overall management of a security program, does.